Welcome to this video, The Crown of Creation. And in this video, we'll explore the disorder created in creation by Adam's fall. And we'll also look into how that affects the redemption of man and the coming third fiat of sanctification, of how they are all related. And to delve into that further, we must first understand what it is that Adam lost. And we must understand also the original state of Adam. In Adam, he had a privileged state of existence. He shared the will of God. And man was made in the image of God, where his soul possessed the three faculties, as described by St. John of the Cross: the will, the intellect, and the memory. And it is through the faculty of the will that Adam enjoyed sharing in the divine will of his Creator. And by doing so, he shared in the essence of God. He lived in and with the one will of the Holy Trinity. And I'd like to do a reading here from the writings of the servant of God, Luisa Picaretta. And it's from volume 15, April 25th, 1923. Adam had a period in which he perfectly fulfilled the purpose for which he was created. He experienced what it means to live of the will of his Creator. And we also were happy in seeing our acts being reproduced in our image. And in these writings, Jesus mentions Adam many, many times to Luisa. And the reason being is that it is important for us to understand the status of Adam, the state in which he lived, and also to understand what it is that was lost during his fall. And that also gives us more insight into the nature of the redemption of man, and also the coming era of sanctification. And this sharing of God's holy divine will that Adam enjoyed means that the acts of man prior to the fall had the nature of this divinity as being provided through participation with the Holy Trinity. So in the shared will of God, Adam was able to produce acts through God's participation that had the nature of the divinity. And divine acts, like God, permeate all things in creation. And like God, these divine acts are also eternal. So what was lost by Adam was the introduction of sin, disobedience. Adam failed the test. Although he had a shared will with the divinity, Adam also had a human will, and when he was tested, he failed. And in that failure, he not only introduced sin into the nature of man, he also lost the ability to share in God's divine will. He lost that right, that birthright. And because of that, there were acts that should have been done in the divine will by man that were never done, and acts that were done imperfectly outside of God's divine will. And you could look at that as the tribulation of creation. It's a deficit that exists in creation, and it's the deficit, that loss within creation, that St. Paul alluded to in Romans in chapter 18, verse 19, when he says that creation moans in anticipation of the coming of the sons of God. And in the redemption, Jesus opened up the gates of heaven. Death was conquered, And Jesus fulfilled the prophecy of Abraham. The words of Abraham in Genesis chapter 22, verse 8, where he tells Isaac, who questioned Abraham, because he had the wood and he had the fire for the sacrifice. And Isaac said to Abraham, "But where is the sacrifice?" Abraham uttered the words that God will fulfill when he told Isaac, God will provide the sacrifice. And it's through that sacrifice that God redeemed the world, who redeemed man from his fall. And there are those who profess the love of the resurrection, but yet they despise the cross. And you cannot eliminate the sacrifice of Christ and have the redemption. If you despise the sacrifice of Christ, you despise Christ himself. Because as the saying goes, no cross, no resurrection. Now to look at the redemption a little further, Jesus also repaired creation itself. And to consider how he did that. In his public life, he preached, created miracles, and he fulfilled his destiny as a savior of man. In his private life, Louisa relates the tale of the touching moments, the sorrowful moments of the death of St. Joseph and Jesus' obedience to his mother Mary as he asked for permission to leave and to begin his public life. And in that private life, his first 30 years, Jesus also tells Louisa that he repairs all of the acts that were missing. In other words, all the acts Adam and his forebears should have done if they lived in the divine will. The acts that are missing in all of creation because they lacked a divine nature. The acts that were never done because of the fall of man, and the acts that were done imperfectly. Jesus tells Louisa that he repaired them all during his private life. I'd like to read a passage from the Book of Heaven by Louisa Picaretta. This is volume 12, January 29th, 1919. And Jesus tells Louisa, in the sphere of the eternal volition, I could see the acts of creatures, those which could be done and were not done, and also the good acts done badly. And I did those which had not been done, and redid those done badly. Now these acts which were not done, except by me alone, are all suspended in my will, and I await the creatures to come to live in my volition, and repeat in my will that which I did. And this takes us to the next act of God, which is the return of the divine will. What Adam lost as his birthright, we are gaining back through the era of sanctification, the third act of God, his third fiat. And what Jesus is saying there in the passage that was read is he's waiting for us to perform what is remaining in the redemption. For those that live in God's will, to do as Jesus did, repair acts that were done imperfectly, and to do acts not done within his divine will that should have been done. This takes us to another passage from Louisa Picaretta's Book of Heaven. This is volume 34, January 10th, 1937. Moreover, everything we have done, both in creation and in redemption, is all an act of giving itself to man. They hang upon his head, but are as though suspended, unable to give themselves, because he does not know them, and does not call them, and does not love them, so as to enclose them in his soul, and to receive so great a good. And is this return of the divine will in man that Jesus is speaking of? Will we be able to perform these acts to redo what Jesus did in the redemption? Now this raises some questions regarding the acts themselves. So if Jesus redid the acts and others have done the acts before us, a good example would be the acts that are well documented in Scripture, the acts of Adam, the acts of someone like Judas. If they are redone by someone else living in the divine will, what does that do to the judgment of the author of those acts? In other words, if Judas has gone to hell, as an example, or if Adam was in purgatory, and all his acts are redone, and therefore they were redone in the divine will, and they exist perfectly in the divine will, what does that do to those judgments? And the answer is, it does not affect the judgment of the individual, which at first glance may be not very intuitive, because you would think that if all the acts of the individual were done perfectly and in the divine will, that individual would go to heaven. That is, the author of the act would go to heaven. But that is not the case. And I can take you to another reading where Jesus explains that redoing the act, whether you're redoing it or you're doing it in an act that was not done, does not affect the original act. And this is from Volume 28, April 12th. And this is Louisa speaking to Jesus. If I can gather everything that they have done and enclose everything in the divine volition, will they not change into acts of the divine will? And Jesus replied, my daughter, in all the acts of creatures, each of them possesses its seed according to how it had been done. If it has not been done in my divine fiat, it does not possess its seed. Therefore, it can never be an act of my will. And he says further down in the same passage, and as all these acts are gathered to enclose them in my fiat, they remain as they are, each one with the nature that the seed gave it, and they appear as acts that the creature can do. In other words, they appear as acts that the creature can redo, and redo again and again. And I think the best way to explain this is by going to the parable of the master of the vineyard. And these parables, they have a character of teaching in them that is a real treasure. So the master of the vineyard, he's seen two laborers that were brothers, and they were idle. And one brother was a good laborer, and the other brother was lazy and a poor laborer. The master of the vineyard asked both of these brothers if they could go to his vineyard and perform some work for the day. And they did so. At the end of the day, the good laborer filled his basket to the brim. However, the poor laborer, his basket was only half full. And the master of the vineyard was angry. He was not happy that the basket was only half full, because of the work of the day was not complete. Now the good laborer, the brother, because of love of the master of the vineyard, because he was a good master, and also because he feared that perhaps neither one would ever be hired again, he goes back to the vineyard and he fills the whole basket and he gives it to the master of the vineyard. And the master of the vineyard is happy because now he has the basket from him originally that is full and the basket that is half full. And he now has another basket that is completely full. And so it is, as we redo these acts, we do not redo or replace the basket that is half full. In other words, the acts that are not done in the divine will, they remain there. And as we redo them, then we have a new act. And these acts that we redo, because they are acts done by someone in the divine will, sharing in the divine will of God, these acts are divine in themselves. And they are represented by the full extra basket that the good laborer provided. However, the acts performed outside of the divine will, in other words, a half a basket, that still remains. And in taking this to its conclusion, other laborers within the vineyard heard what happened, that the master only received a half a basket, and some, out of their own initiative, for the same reason as a good laborer, decided to go and fill a basket and to compensate the good master for work that was done poorly. And they too provided additional full baskets to the master. And now there's a condition where instead of the master having 2 baskets that are full, he now has many baskets that are full. And this helps to teach we do not replace acts. We're not replacing them. We can redo acts over and over again. And the act that was originally done, let's say the example that we were speaking of, say by Judas or by Adam, they remain. They remain for us to redo. The fact that we redo them does not affect the judgment of the author of the act. So as we can see in the consideration of creation and redemption, the year of sanctification, these 3 fiats are acts of God. They're all in act, and they're all awaiting the culmination of the sanctification of man, the crown of creation, the crown of redemption, and the crown of man. I want to thank you for watching, and as always, please like and subscribe. Thank you, and God bless.